That's a good business adventure for this one kid, but nobody liked that.
Yeah, I mean, we could go down a whole path of prison industrial complex and how the normalization of prison in black and brown and low income communities. Um, and
That's
I think,
interesting.
yeah, I mean, there's this like um, Malcolm Gladwell, I think, book where he talks about, you know, over a certain percentage of people in a community being incarcerated means that each individual knows or is related to X number of people who are incarcerated, and that um, over this certain percentage, there's like a tipping point where it becomes more likely to go to prison because it's just like what everybody does. You know what I mean? And so, like, where I went to high school, it was like, yo, which college are you going to? And it wasn't really a question. So you wouldn't, it would have been like weird to be like, nah, I'm not going to college. You know what I mean? So like college was normalized. Um, and I think that, prison through systemic oppression has become so normalized that it's like a stripe that you earn or it's a badge of honor, or it's just like a rite of passage. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, like you're going to get arrested a bunch of times for um, whatever. Like, that's just part of being black or being from the hood or whatever it is. And like, that's just normal. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, yeah, like I was
I mean,
talking to a
it's
friend of mine.
even just to like add to what you're saying. I read this book called The Ballad of Danny Wolf, and it's talking about a Native American in Canada, part of a gang called FBI. And the only way to elevate in a gang to the leadership was to do a hard bid. You had to do a hard bid on your record, and so basically the entire leadership of the gang is in jail.
Hmm,
And I didn't know that that's even a thing that could ever happen. So
right.
imagine you're in a universe where the only way to achieve real power is to be locked up in bars, right?
Right.
I didn't ever think about that one time. So just to like add to what you're saying in terms of the normalization, at least in some communities, that's possible.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, Answer said that Malcolm Gladwell book that you're mentioning, Iron, is Tipping Point, which
Mm.
is also right. That's the
Yeah, so
roots.
I noticed that I said there
Said
comes
it.
a tipping
Yeah.
point, but I was at the ones I've never read Tipping Point, but that's supposed to be an ill one.
There's
And
also
it's
outliers
supposed
and
to be an ill one.
talking to
But
strangers,
I read David and Goliath and Outliers, and then I read the most recent one, which I think is
talking to
called
strangers.
Talking to Strangers,
Yeah, it's a
which
good
was
one.
crazy, but I didn't like because it was just talk. It was a lot of stuff that was just like hard to hear about.
Okay, no, here's my problem with that book. I remember I started reading the book and I was like, okay, this is what the book was about. And you can ask my girlfriend, like she can show it up in the chat in the Zoom if you want. I just spent the whole book going, what the fuck is this book about? And it was a
Right.
lot of interesting facts of stuff, and I think like there were some interesting points made, but I didn't really understand what the fucking point of that book was. Whereas
Yeah, it wasn't
Outliers
as
was super
clear.
fucking
It wasn't
clear.
as clear of a like this is building up to this thesis as the other books that I've read from him.
Yeah, it was just like, okay, you said a lot of stuff and then you toured and sold your book. And I'm like, okay, that's what it is. Now, don't get me
I,
wrong. No disrespect to Malcolm Gladwell.
yeah,
I
no,
fucking
I
love
didn't
his
like that. I
books.
didn't really like. I didn't really like the book. I think my takeaway was that everything exists in a broader context, and that our interactions as people need to be kind of like made a little more relaxed so we can give each other the space to have the leeway of the context. And then also that there's a certain degree of assumed trust that's necessary for communal living, and that if we just distrusted everybody, like you couldn't function. You know what I mean? Because he
Right.
talks about all the kids that were like abused, sexual abuse by the sports coaches, and it was like we can live our lives using that as an example of the world being a horrible place, but then like nobody would go to soccer practice ever, and like this world just wouldn't. You would never send your kid to with a babysitter, like, you know what I mean? So, but yeah, there was just some horrible shit to hear about too, like that was
Yeah,
just
like I got this takeaway of people be drinking way too much in parties these days was a big thing I remember from that book. Like it went in so deep that I'm like, yo, maybe there's a problem there that nobody's actually talking
Oh
about.
yeah, with college like sexual assault stuff. Yeah.
And like like people, because like all those college movies in the 80s that everyone remembers the good old days, the alcohol percentage is like, you know,
Right.
beer. And now
Yeah.
it's hard liquor being shot back, and then talked about metabolism rates of males to females and how these
Right.
ladies is trying to keep up with dudes in some like equal front, which is probably bad news bears in alcohol land. And then, so the rate of blackouts in these mob environments has increased substantially from what all of the parents remember of good old partying. So basically, all the 40-year-olds and 50-year-olds, what you think about of a college party is nothing compared to what these kids are doing right now.
Yeah. Plus the pills and the lean and like all the other shit that they're mixing up with it for sure.
Big facts.